Yard, chapter 36. Here they come again. Horace and Will and Evelyn both turned to look towards the Timidry forces. The riders were cantering forward again, and this time it looked like a major attack. Mr. H had commanded nearly 2,000 men to a frontal assault on the Canadian lines. They rode forward, their hoofbeats echoing in the valley, formed in a wedge shape that was aimed at the Canadian centre, and the command post where Holt, Eric, and Ragnarok directed the Canadian defence. Will and Evelyn had taken advantage of the lull in the fighting to take a quick bite to eat, and a welcome drink of water. Will's throat was parched from both the tension and the non-stop shouting of orders. He guessed Evelyn felt the same. Horace, who had already eaten, had been keeping watch. Now, at his call, Evelyn slipped down into the sheltered position, and the archers, who had been sprawled comfortably against the earthworks, came to their feet, bows in hand. The shield bearers, who had also been relaxing, took their positions beside them. Silently they waited. In the lull, the arrow bin in front of each archer had been replenished with new shafts. Even now the women of Hushholm were gathered in the great hall, making fresh arrows for the battle. Will studied the mass of riders. He had 75 archers still standing in the line, several of them lightly wounded. They had lost 11 men, killed by Timidry arrows, and a further 14 had been wounded too seriously to continue fighting. As the Timidry forces advanced, Will estimated that he could manage 4 volleys before they reached this Canadian line, maybe 5. There would be 300 arrows raining down on the tightly packed mass of horsemen, and in that formation the incidence of hits would be high. If Will aimed for the center of the mass, even his undershoots and overshoots would be effective. Left front, position 3, he called, and the machine swung into action again. Ready, called Evelyn. Draw, shoot, shouted Will, and gestured for Horace not to call the shields into position. As yet they were not under attack. The more time he had to do damage to the mass of Timidry horsemen, the better chances he would give Holt and Eric to repel the Timidry's main thrust. Reload, he called, and waited for Evelyn's call once more. When it came, he sent another volley on its way. As it started its upward trajectory, the first volley came down, and he saw a horseman falling once again. Left, half left, he called, swinging the aiming point to match the progress of the horsemen as they moved from right to left across his front. He called the elevation again, shortening the time. Then another 75 shafts soared away with that now familiar slithering sound of arrows scraping across bows. Now the horsemen were galloping, and he adjusted the angle once more. Left, position 2, he called. Evelyn's call told him that the men had reloaded. Draw, shoot. And now he heard the first sounds of close combat as the leading ranks of horsemen made contact with the Canadian lines. It would be too risky to try to shoot into the Timidry front ranks now, but he could still interdict the ranks behind them. Left, half left, he called, and the archers swung their arm point back to the right by 20 degrees. Then suddenly the air around him was alive with the hissing sound of arrows, and all along the line his archers were falling, some crying out in pain and shock, and others more ominously silent. Shields, shields, Horace was yelling, and the shield bearers moved into position. But not before more archers went down. Desperately, Will swung around and saw for the first time the smaller group that had moved forward to attack his position while he had been busy engaging the main force. There were about 50 archers, he estimated, all mounted and pouring steady, accurate shots into his position. Behind them rode another, larger group armed with lances and sabres. Target 4, he called. Target front, he called, and muttered an aside to Horace. Be quick with those shields when we need them. The warrior apprentice nodded, watching anxiously as the 50 riders continued to shoot. Now arrows were thudding into his own shield and into the earth rampart in front of them. Position 1, Will called. This was This was straight and level point-blank range. "Draw, ready," he heard Evelyn call. Then Horace yelled for the shields to open, and Will, almost on top of him, called for the release. As the volley hissed on its way, Horace was already calling for the shields to come back into position again. But even in that short time, another half a dozen of their men went down to the Timajai arrows. Now Will noticed the red insignia on the Timajai shoulders, and he realized why the standard of enemy archers had picked up in accuracy and rate of fire. "They're all Kaijin," he said to Horace. As he spoke, he raised his own bow and, shooting rapidly, emptied 3 saddles before Horace dragged him behind the shelter of his shield again. Half a dozen shafts slammed into it as he did so. "Are you mad?" Horace cried, but Will's eyes were wild with pain as he looked up at his friend. "They're killing my men," he replied, and went to lunge out into the open once more, obsessed with the idea of stopping the Timajai specialists from picking his men off one at a time. Horace's big hand stopped him. "It won't help if they kill you," he yelled, and slowly the sense of it all sank into Will's brain. "Ready," called Evelyn. He realized that it was the 3rd time she had given the call. She was prompting him to action. Still covered by Horace's shield, he assessed the position. The lancers and swordmen, unhampered by any harassing fire from the archers, were already closing with the Scandinavians in front of his position. Hand-to-hand fighting was breaking out along the line. Further to his left, the main body of Timajai were engaged in a savage battle with the center of the Scandinavian line. The position was too confused to see who was winning, if indeed anyone was. Meanwhile, to his front, the Timajai marksmen, gathered by Mr. H into a special unit, were countering parallel to the Scandinavian's defensive line, widely dispersed so as not to offer a mass target to his volleys, and engaging his archer with accurate aim shots as they were exposed. He knew that if he attempted to direct another volley at the Timajai, he would lose half his men in the exchange. There was only one solution now, he realized. He leaned over his pepere, yelling to the line of archers below him, a line that was now several depleted. He saw individual shots, he yelled, pointing to the countering lines of Timajai Kaijin. "Shoot whenever you're ready, and aim for the bowmen." It was the best he could do. At least this way the Timajai would not be presented with an open line of shields as his men fired. They would have to react to individuals firing irregularly. It would give his men a better chance of survival. It would also lessen the effectiveness of their shooting, he knew. Without a central direction, their accuracy would fall away. There was, however, one more thing he could do. He glanced down to make sure that the arrow bin in front of him was fully charged, and quickly plucked 4 shafts out, knocking one and holding one others ready between the fingers of his bow hand. "Keep that shield up and ready," he said to Horace, and stepped forward to the pepere, still concealed by his friend's larger shield. He took a deep breath, then stood clear and let 4 shafts go in rapid succession, spinning back behind the cover of the first shield as the first Timajai shafts whistled around their ears in reply. Horace, watching, saw 2 of the shooters go down to Will's arrows. A third took an arrow in the fleshy part of his left calf, and the 4th arrow missed entirely. He whistled in admiration. It was a remarkable shooting. He was about to say something to that effect when he noticed the look of total concentration on his friend's face, and decided to say nothing. Again, Will took a deep breath, knocking another arrow, then spun out into the open, loosed again, and lunged back into cover. Now Horace began to truly appreciate the uncanny accuracy that had been drilled into his friend in the woods and fields around Castle Redmond. As Will spun in and out of cover, losing the off shots, sometimes 1, sometimes 2 or 3, and hitting mark after mark, the other archers in the Scandinavian force added their contributions as well, but none of them possessed the speed and accuracy of the Apprentice ranger. And as more of them were struck by counterfire from the patrolling Kaijin, the survivors became more and more nervous and arrow shy, more likely to shoot without aiming, then dive back behind cover again. "Change sides," Will ordered him briefly, gesturing for Horace, who had been shielding to his left, to step across to his right. Horace shifted the shield to his right arm, and Will ducked below the breastwork level and moved to Horace's left side. He had been varying his shooting patterns, sometimes shooting just 1 arrow and at others letting go a rapid volley to keep the Timajai guessing. Now he decided that they were accustomed to seeing him appearing on the right side of the big shield. He selected another 4 arrows and stepped to his left, shooting as he came clear. 2 more saddles emptied, and he darted back into cover again. The change in size had worked for him. Not a single arrow had come near him in reply. He stepped left again, snapped off another shot, and then, not knowing what instinct prompted him to do it, dropped immediately to his hands and knees behind the earthworks. A vicious hiss split the air directly above him as he did so, and he felt his mouth go dry with fear. Horace, seeing him drop, thought he was hit and went to his knees beside him. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. Will tried a weak grin, but didn't really think it came off. "I'm fine," he managed to croak around the dryness in his mouth. "Just scared to death is all." They stood again, sheltering behind the shield and feeling the rattle of Timajai arrows against it. We realized that the pattern had changed once more, and the majority of the Timajai archers were concentrating on his position. It was a chance for his men to release another massed volley, he realized, but if the Timajai saw or heard him preparing them for it, the element of surprise would be lost. "Evelyn," he called the girl sheltering in his covered position below him. She glanced up at him, a question in her eyes, and he continued, "Relay my direction. We'll get in another volley." She waved her hand, indicating that she understood. Unwittingly, as they had concentrated on his position, trying to hit his elusive figure who darted in and out of cover and peppered them with a deadly hail of arrows, the enemy had begun to bunch up. There had been little in the way of effective fire from the other archers for some minutes now, and the Kaijin had all moved towards the command position to get a shot at Will. "Front right," he called softly, and heard Evelyn relay the orders. Nothing happened for a moment or so. Then he heard her breathing, berating the men below her, sure, shaming them into compliance. Gradually, one after another, they turned to face the direction she had given them. "Ready," she called back, and he gave her the elevation. "Position 1. The bows came up to the horizontal, then steadied. "Draw," he said, and heard the order relayed once more. Then, taking a deep breath, he yelled, "Shields down, shoot!" And a fraction of a second after, as the volley was still on its way, he heard Horace call shields up. Realizing that attention would be focused for some seconds on the line of archers, Will darted into the clear and poured arrow after arrow into the Timajai ranks. His archer's volley struck home. He had less than 50 men firing now, but still, a mass of arrows slammed into the Timajai riders, sending a dozen of them sprawling into the dust. Then another 5 went down under the hail of arrows that Will had let loose before Horace, diving at him, dragged him below the level of the earthworks before the Timajai arrows could find him. A storm of arrows flooded into the earthworks behind them. Horace rolled clear of his friend, dusting the dirt from his knees and elbows. "Do you have a death wish?" he asked. Will grinned at him. "I'm just relying on your judgment," he replied. "I can't keep track of everything in my head." They stood behind the shields again and saw that the Kaijin, what remained of them, were edging away to longer range. They still fired at the Scandinavian ranks, but with far less effect than before. Will frowned as he assessed the angles and position, then pointed to the center of the Scandinavian line, where the main battle was still raging. "We can start shooting volleys again," he told Horace. "If the shield bearers shift their shields to their right arms and our archers stand to their left, they'll be covered from return shots." Horace studied the position, and a wide grin broke out on his face. The remaining Kaijin were directly to their front now, so that the line of the archers could shoot diagonally towards the rear of the main Scandinavian army without having to move from behind the cover of their shields. Hastily, they called their idea down to Evelyn, who relayed the directions to the men. The depleted line of archers looked at their young commander and nodded their understanding. Then a thought occurred to him. "Evelyn," he called, and she looked up at him, her eyes questioning. "Once you've started, you call the volleys. Keep them at position 3 and just keep them shooting. I'll keep those damn Kaijin honest." She grinned at him and waved a hand in reply. There would be no need to change angle or elevation once they began. The plunging volleys would be directed at the mass of the Timajai rear ranks. It might give Holt, Eric, and Ragnar the respite they needed. "Face half left," called Will, "position 3. The 40-odd remaining men brought their bows to their maximum elevation. "Draw, shoot." He waited this time to assess the effect of the volley, making sure the men's angle and elevation were correct. He saw arrows striking the support ranks of Timajai, saw the panic caused by the suddenly renewed arrow storm. "Keep them shooting," he called to Evelyn, who turned and shot at the thin line of Timajai shooters, drawing a brisk shower of arrows in return. Behind him, he heard the thump the thrumming noise of another volley arcing away towards the main battle. He shot again, picking a target and seeing him fall. Then he felt a surge of excitement in his chest as a small group of riders began to move. "Horace, they're pulling back," he yelled excitedly. He pointed wildly at the line of shooters. Less than 20 of them remained, and they were gradually falling back from their exposed position. Gradually at first, anyway. As they moved further, they moved faster and faster, none of them wanting to be the last one exposed to the accurate shots from the Canadian lines. He gripped his big friend's arm and shook him with excitement. They're turning it in, he yelled. Horace nodded soberly, jerking his thumb towards the hard-pressed line of Canadians' defense below them. "Just as well they are," he said, "because these ones aren't." Below them, the timid sawmen, dismounted now, were pouring through a gap they had forced in the Canadian lines. Alright, I'd like to thank you for listening to read up to chapter 36. If you'd like to listen to read chapter 37, then please stay posted, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.